give some ideas to us, to this staff, before, again, we put together a budget recommendation, which is our requirement that we give city manager gives a budget recommendation to the city council. So we're hopefully going to accomplish two things tonight. We're going to give you a lot of time to give us input. We're going to write down all the input, and we'll pass it on to the city council. There'll be a bit of information that they'll use to make their final decisions on the budget. And also, we're going to have the finance director go over a little bit of background on the budget itself, a little bit of information that I think is important for all citizens to know, okay? So if you're here tonight, we hope you'll stand up. The mayor will come around with a microphone. You'll be able to give us some suggestions on the upcoming budget. We're going to be looking for ideas on service levels. Maybe you want to increase service levels. You'd like to see us expend funds in a certain area. They could be ongoing operational kind of programming, could be capital improvements, those one-time big capital improvements, street projects, things like that you like to see. We always like to know if you're going to ask us to do more. We like to know, is there any areas you like to do less on? Because I know people are always concerned about when you do more on top of more, it means more taxes, more utility fees. So sometimes you might be willing to cut back in certain areas too, to offset the increases. Before we get started, I want to tell you who's here tonight from the city. So we have Councilman Martin's here. Raise your hand. Councilman Garton's here. Mayor Hala's here. Assistant City Manager Deb Shildroth, our new assistant. Excuse me. Susan Guiazza, our Public Relations Officer. Nancy Masteller, our Budget Coordinator. Dwayne Pitcher, our Finance Director. And Aaron Thompson is in my office, a support staff member who's going to help take minutes for it. And I'm Steve Shanker, the city manager. So if we could start off a little bit of background, we won't inundate you with too much information, but good background information on the overall view of the budget. Dwayne, why don't you take it over?
Sure, thanks, Steve. As Steve mentioned, our main theme tonight is to get input from citizens on what they'd like to see in the budget, but I'm going to spend a few minutes just kind of go over where we are with the current year's budget, and then a little bit on the schedule for when we'll take input from various areas of the budget. So this isn't the only opportunity, it's just the first one. Steve had mentioned one of the first things that we use as a data point for our budget is the resident satisfaction survey, which goes out in the spring. That's back, it's been collated, put together, it's out on our web if anybody wants to look at that. We use that as kind of a big picture input to the budget where the council can get some idea of just the things Steve mentioned. What are we doing well? What do we need to improve on? Other areas of emphasis. Then we move to September, which is now past, of course, and departments prepare CIP projection, project information, so they're starting to work on those bigger projects, and also start to prepare for the amended 2019-20 budget, that's our current year, and the budget that we'll be proposing that'll be out starting July 1st of 20. The first opportunity for public input is tonight, the town budget meeting, and we'll receive input on budget service levels and projects. And then in November and December, staff will draft a capital improvement plan, and that's a plan that goes out for 5 years. The first year of that will be adopted by the council in the spring. And then we'll start what we call the plan and productive review of budget entries probe, which it is pretty probing. And those meetings are conducted with departments. So that's when we look at the details of the budget so that so you know that part's done. When we get to the end, all the details have been gone through. On the 10th of December, the City Council will have a budget issues meeting, and that'll be held to review issues and priorities to get feedback from the council on things that they'd like us to emphasize, and then we'll give them some information on where we think we're going to be financially. And then in January of 20, we'll have a couple meetings where we'll review the capital improvement plan. The first one will be a workshop where we'll present the plan to the council on the 21st of January, and then we'll have public input on the 28th. Those are both public meetings. There will be no input on the first meeting. That's just presenting the plan. And it'll be posted on the website. So if you have issues with the capital improvement plan, you can look it over then and come to the meeting on the 28th. Then in January, February, the council will review the entire program budget. So that's the entire document, the budget that covers all the operating, the first year of the capital. We'll have a series of 5 public meetings. The first one will be on January 31st, and that's a Friday afternoon. And at that meeting, we'll give an overview, big picture of the entire budget. So not any individual services for the most part, unless there's going to be a big change, but the overall impact of the budget that's put together. Then that following week on a Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, that's February 4th, 5th, and 6th, that's when all the departments will come in and present their sections of the budget. So they're each scheduled who's going to appear that night. So for example, if you only have an interest in Parks and Recreation, you can just show up on that night, and at least you'll know the order they go. We never know exactly what time, but that's the presentations of the individual budgets. On the 11th of February, which is the following Tuesday, we'll have a wrap-up meeting where council will hold their, make their decisions, and then we'll do a public hearing on March 10th. We have to do some publication before that. There's a little bit of change this year that we'll need to work out the schedule on that, but there's been some changes to the laws and how we adopt budgets, so there'll actually be 2 hearings this year. And our deadline to adopt it will be the 10th or the 31st of March, I believe. So that's a little bit later than in the past. But for us, since we always get all this information out early, it'll be pretty close to the same schedule. So kind of where are we right now? So if you're in the Ames School District and the city of Ames, about 45% of your tax bill is related to the school district. So this is how, when you receive that tax bill, it's laid out on there. This is where the money goes for that total amount that you pay in property taxes. Approximately a third is the city. That's that dark gray up there. And that's been pretty sticky around that rate for several years, kind of moves in and around, but it's around a third. The next biggest taxing entity is the county at a little over 20%. And then our local community college, DMAC, is a little over 2%. So that's how the taxes break out amongst the total bill. When we look at big picture, what goes into the tax bill, there's 2 items. There's the expenses that are decided on to deliver whatever services the citizens want and communicate to the city council. And then how are those expenses spread out? You know, how's the revenue collected? And that's based on the valuation of the property. So if we can get some orderly growth in value that can fund new services, that can help hold property taxes down. And here's a little bit of the history on where we've been as far as increase in taxable valuation. For the most part, Ames has had pretty good, strong growth, which has helped maintain some pretty level tax rates, which I'll show pretty soon. But there have been some years where taxable growth was pretty small. So if you look back at 14, 15 at 1.2%, if our expenses, and they did grow faster than that, and with new services, then taxes will have to go up. In years when we had 8% increase almost, or 5.7, if we don't increase expenses that much, we can see your tax rate go down a little bit. So here's a little bit of the history of the tax rates over the last few years. And you can see that does kind of match up with the way we had growth. We were at 1063 back in 1516. Then we were right at 1037, 1038 per thousand of value in 16, 17, 17, 18. And now we've been just a little over $10. And that's because partly holding expenses and good growth in valuation. Another factor that I'll point out here that has a pretty big impact on our tax rate is local option sales tax. So if you're familiar with that tax, that's the 1% that goes to the local governments. And for the city of Ames, the way that ordinance was passed, 60% of that goes directly to property tax relief. So how much impact that has depends on how much you collect in local option sales tax. And you can see that impact steadily going down over the last few years. And everybody knows, the current status of retail. A lot of it is shifted to online sales. And previously, those online sales weren't taxed. Our local retailers were not on a level playing field. But there was a Supreme Court case, I believe it was South Dakota versus Wayfair, that allowed states to collect that tax. And that's been done in Iowa, started January 1st this past year. So we hope to see that local option number move up as those taxes for online sales are distributed.
Can I make a comment on that? I want to point out something to you about growth in assessed valuation, taxable valuation, because there's 2 parts to this now. When you see that grow, that number might be high. It could be influenced by 2 things: new growth That's never been on the tax rolls before. Usually want to see that. If we get more new growth, we can spread our expenditures, the cost of the expenditures out among more people. So it holds our taxes down. The other one is reassessments. So admittedly, this is good for us, maybe not for you, but your property, one of your biggest assets, is held very strong in the market, if you know, and your assessed valuation has been going up. What I want to point out is just because your assessed valuation goes up a certain percentage, your taxes won't go up that same percentage. The city council does a good job. If you'll notice, there were times when the tax rate actually dropped. And the reason it's dropped is if your assessed value goes up, that's actually given to you by the city assessor, right? That establishes the market value. The city council controls the tax rate. So if it goes up a certain percentage, I don't care if it went up 10%, you go, my taxes are going to go up 10%. That's not necessarily true. The council will lower the tax rate to offset that increase. What the council looks at, how much money does it take to operate the city? And they do a very good job. Now, some cities don't do that. They'll keep their tax rate the same, assessed values will go up, and they'll collect a heck of a lot more money from all this. But you can see the history of our city council has done a good job is when the assessed values go up too high, they don't need that much money, they will offset it by a reduction in a tax rate. Everybody understand that? And you can see the history of that. You can see where it's actually been done in the past. Okay.
So where does that money go? The biggest portion, and this is not just property taxes, this is our entire budget. So there's a lot more to the budget than just property taxes. And the biggest portion is, this is actually the revenue portion, is charges for services. And the vast majority of that is our utilities. So the big ones, water, sewer, and electric. We also have stormwater. They charge for those services. They aren't funded by property taxes. And that's the biggest source of our revenue. Also, not surprisingly, the biggest source of our expenses. Property taxes make up about 15% of the total revenue for the city. Bond proceeds, that number can vary substantially. That's the blue piece of the pie there, depending on the projects that we're having done. When we're doing the water plant, that was a very large project. Bond proceeds made up a larger portion of our revenue. And then, of course, we had corresponding expense to build that. But this just gives you an idea of where the money comes from. Then here's the total of the revenues for the total city budget. It's, if you look down just before transfers, it's a total of over $200 million. So, you know, it's a large entity as far as operations. And then we have transfers of about 23 million, total revenues 237 million. That's current adopted budget. So where's that go? Utilities, they're about a third of our budget. Capital improvement plan, that's another 23%. A lot of that goes within the utilities. It's a lot of expense to maintain those large, essentially industrial type operations. Then you see public safety. That's funded primarily through property tax. That's your police and fire for the most part. Debt service, that's about 8%. That's paying back those bonds. Transportation at 8.6%. Community enrichment, this is a classification that includes things such as the library, parks and recreation, and that's where the money goes. So you can see total expenses before transfers were about 226 million. We had total expenditures that were actually higher than our revenue this year. And some years we'll have revenues that are higher than expenses. And that's because we collect in our rates, our utility rates, enough to fund most of the capital improvements and the operations. So some years we're collecting more to put money together for large projects. And then some years like this, we're spending that down as we're doing those projects. So property taxes, I'll just point out a couple things on here. By the state code, we're limited to an $8.10 general levy. And if you look up on the screen, our general levy is $5.52. So we're well under that amount. And as Steve mentioned, most cities, the valuation goes up, they just collect more money because this rate is at $8.10, the maximum for most of the cities in Iowa, or most of the larger cities. Another levy is trust and agency, and that's where we can separately levy for benefits. For the city, we only levy for the police and fire, or most of the police and fire pension contributions. That's about 67%. Transit levy, I think most people are aware that transit is primarily funded through student fees and federal grants, but there's also a pretty substantial property tax portion of that amounts to nearly $2 million. There's the total before debt service. Debt service, that's obviously once in place, once you issue the debt for projects. And there's our total levy of about $10.03 per thousand. And it brings in a total of $31 million. That's current year. So where's that go? You collect $10.02 per thousand. If you look at 100,000 of a home valuation, and then we have what's called rollback. Everybody that gets a property tax bill probably sees that. That means your taxable rate is actually some percent of your actual valuation. So if you had a $100,000 home or any increment of that, your taxable value would be $56,918. You apply that rate, and $570.65 would go to the city. That's approximately 1/3 of your bill. So you'd have a bill of a little over $1,500, a little over $1,600. $570 would go to the city. So where's the $570 go? We break that down. The largest portion is to streets and traffic, and most of that is debt service to pay for those large street projects. The largest category together is public safety. So if you would combine police and fire, those would be well over $200 of the $500. Library, which that also includes the debt service for the renewal of the library, that's about $70. Parks and Rec, a lot of recreation is funded through fees, but parks, we don't charge fees for any of our parks. Transit's about $36, general support $27, down to planning service $10. Now we're starting to get into some smaller numbers. Resource recovery is primarily funded through user fees or tipping fees, but there's also amount that's paid per capita for each of the participating communities. And for us, that amounts to about $6 per 100,000 in your property tax bill. Storm sewer, we also have a storm sewer fee, but some of the capital improvements are paid for with debt service. So that's partly out of your property taxes. Facilities, cemetery, and airport. I don't believe any's for the airport right now. And that's pretty much, that's been self-funding. But facilities and the cemetery, sometimes it breaks even, sometimes it requires a little bit of property tax. Animal control is a small number. Building safety, I don't want anybody to think that building safety is free. They do collect fees, though, for building permits, and when things are going well, it covers all their costs. If there's not a lot of construction, there may be there has been times where property taxes have helped fund that. There's many years when they contribute, though, to the total balance. So where do we stand as far as levies in comparison to larger cities in Iowa? Just so if you're curious about that, I mentioned that $8.10 levy, that being the maximum amount that a city can levy in the general. And if you look on here, most of the cities levy at that rate, $8.10. Urbandale's at $7.24, Ankeny at $6.25, and then Ames is at $5.50. And the total levy were the lowest amongst the group at $10.03. And then we also look at a total levy per capita. That's another measure that we like to look at. That can, sometimes be a little misleading. If there's a lot of commercial and industrial property, they wouldn't have as many of the per capita, but they'd have a lot of areas to serve. So if you look at a Cedar Rapids, that's a bit higher. West Des Moines is a good example. They have a lot of commercial property there in the 80-35 area especially. So even though they've got a fairly low rate, their per capita is pretty high. So that's kind of where we are right now. And
Do you all follow your property taxes at all? Sometimes it's in escrow, so you don't look at it. You look at your property tax bill. You're aware that the property tax bill you get, remember, the city of Ames, the amount that's controlled by the mayor and council is about 33% of the total bill. In the state of Iowa, the biggest portion of your property tax goes to fund local school districts. So that's about 45 to 46, 47, 48% usually. And then the county portion is usually about 25, 26%. So it's an interesting fact. You could have a very good friend who has a house that has a market value or a taxable value of $200,000. And if you live north of Bloomington Road, you'd be in the Gilbert School District. And you'd pay a certain tax, right? With the city, the school, and the county. And if you're south of Bloomington, you'd be in the Ames School District. And you'd have a different tax for your school district. Same for the city, same for the county. So for that same $200,000 house, you could be separated by 2 blocks. You'll probably pay a little bit more. The school tax at Gilbert is higher than the school tax in Ames. Same value, all living within the city of Ames, but your property tax bill will be higher. Everybody understand that? Okay, good. Any questions you have on the budget before we start off asking for input? 2 important documents, the capital improvements plan, 5-year plan on some of the big projects, a lot of utility projects, electric, water, sewer, storm sewer. You can see electric projects in here, all online under the city website, under the finance department. The program performance budget we're going to be talking about here talks about all the different services we provide. Not by department necessarily, but all of the services. It's a performance budget too, so it's pretty cool. You can look at some of our efficiency and effectiveness measures, the cost to maintain a curb mile of street, cost for a mile, passenger mile and buses, what it costs us. It allows us to benchmark against ourselves to get better, allows us to benchmark against other cities too. And you want to know what certain services cost, it's all laid out here. It's not a line item budget, it's by program and activity. That's a pretty powerful document for the council and also for you for information too. Okay? No other questions on the budget? Why don't we, yes, sir. Wait a minute, let the mayor get you on. For the folks, the thousands of people who are watching right now.
I'm sure. I'm just curious, does the council or and any of the city staff have any kind of insights how those cities that are levying at $8.10 versus Ames, what services they're providing for that additional almost $3?
I wouldn't want to, not an expert on those, I can tell you. I'll tell you, there's 3 reasons, or maybe 4, why we have such a low property taxes. One of them is that we have very good staff members who work daily to try to hold the cost of expenditures down. It's a fact. For efficiency, the number of firefighters, the number of police officers, the number of parks people we have per acre, we are more efficient than a lot of cities. That's good. Another big important aspect is the local option sales tax. Not all those cities, those large cities have that. You've seen they've been trying to get that down in a lot of the metropolitan area in Des Moines. Iowa City's tried a lot of the areas. It's a good tax for us because it allows us to capture revenue from people who come in and visit the city, put burden on all of our services, but don't pay property taxes. So in the city of Ames, 60% of the proceeds go to reduce your property taxes. In fact, there was a graph there. You want to show it? Here it is here. See in 1920, it's the local option sales tax, the gray. Instead of $10.03, it'd be $1.60 more. That would affect that 810 levy. So that's very helpful to us. Okay. And the third reason is we actually manage a number of different businesses. You have the general fund kind of operations, but we also have electric utility, a water utility, a sewer utility, where we're able to cover our overhead, spread our overhead among all those. My salary, for example, I'm the CEO for all those utilities. So a portion of my salary is charged to all those funds. City attorneys spread out that way. City clerk's office spread out that way. Our whole data processing unit is spread out. So if we didn't have all those utilities to spread it out, it would be all forced back into the general fund and the property tax paying entity. Not all those cities have all those utilities to share the cost. So we all benefit. So that's one of the those are 3 reasons I believe we have lower taxes than many cities. Good question.
So I'm not sure if this is the place to ask this, but maybe somebody can answer this. I know that the city has held workshops, individual workshop days, 2 or 3 hours on individual topics related to, I think, to the budget or just in general. And I didn't see any of those on the schedule. Is that because that's not covered under budget or because there aren't any scheduled this year?
Mayor?
Yes, the workshops that we have are going to be focused on, for example, long-range plan we're working on. We had one that was on massage ordinance. Those were workshops that were not related at all to the budget. And so the ones that were identified are strictly just budget conversation. And they're very intense. It takes a lot of time. We go through an awful lot of numbers. Council members are expected to go through and understand, a lot of those budget numbers, but we don't do anything in a vacuum. So everything is done in public. But otherwise, workshops during the year after the budget's adopted are specific topics related to things that are going on in the community, to try and let council have more conversations with the community as well as also amongst themselves.
So we focus on big issues that allows the dialogue, where if we put it at the regular council meeting, there's a lot of pressure. There's 60 items on an agenda that needs a legislative decisions by the council. It's tough to free them up to have a very long and intricate discussion with people who are interested in the topic. So we focus the workshops on those kind of dialogues.
So this coming January, we'll have at least one, if not two, work sessions that we'll just basically go over to a different location, roll our shirt sleeves up. We'll actually reset goals for the next 2 years. We have biannual goals versus annual goals. You see them listed up there. We'll evaluate those, and then we'll try and get some workshops sometimes that are tied in with those goals and try and make that all weave together. So we're trying to be measuring and accomplishing what we set out, and also based on public input.
Good question. People are probably interested in that. Any other questions? Okay. The mayor will go around. You're all here. You don't have to stand up even. You just talk in the microphone so we can get it on, get it out to the television audience. We're looking for any input you'd like to give to the council on maybe projects, CIP, capital projects. It could be service levels you'd like to see more of. Anything you'd like to see less of would be very helpful too, okay? And maybe we're talking about 2 fiscal years too. Well, it's much harder because the budget is already set for this current fiscal year, which goes until June 30th. But we need to know when your expectation is, if it's for this year or next year. We're really trying to focus on next year, hopefully. But maybe there's something out there I haven't anticipated that you'd like to see happen this year. But I think we want to focus on next year mostly, okay? All right, who wants to start off? We'll write all these down. We're going to give them to the council. So you might start with your name if you could, if that's all right. Name and address. I'll give this to Aaron too, but we'll get on record if that's okay. And then shoot away. And then Susan, I used to write it down, but I'm terrible. I'm a left-handed person on charts. I can't do that very illegibly. So Susan's going to try to type it in for us. So we'll have it for posterity.
Hi, I'm Mike Solsberger, 905 Douglas Avenue here in Ames. And I'm here basically to talk about something on a spend more. And this is not something necessarily next year. This is more of long-term over the next year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, and that's spending on the arts. Okay. As your numbers up there showed, the main way that the city spends money on the arts, as we all know, is through the CODA grants. And this year that was about $240,000, of which $40,000 of that was to the band shell, which left about $200,000 then for all of arts in Ames. And the first thing that I noticed on your numbers up there is that comes through Parks and Rec. And your Parks and Rec's number, right, comes through Parks and Rec? CODA is through Parks and Rec, isn't it?
No, it's paid out of local option sales tax. Just it's
own program.
an allocation by the city.
Okay. Well, the point here is that the number that has been spent on arts basically has been about the same since I've been in the city. It seems like on that CODA, we're getting maybe 2 or 3% a year. I think there's some other arts people here that are going to talk about individually for their arts organization, why 3% isn't really making it anymore, and some of their expenditures that are going up on other things. But I'm here to talk more big picture, which is, why even spend money on the arts? And, some things that I think that we forget about here is, as a city, we are all the time trying to attract business, and we're trying to, attract money in that way and things like that. Well, it seems like we've done a pretty good job of that, as is evidenced by the fact that we've got the lowest unemployment rate, in the United States, not just in the state of Iowa, but in the United States. So it seems like we've got the business here that's employing a lot of people and all that kind of stuff. And now we sort of have the other problem, which is we can't get enough people to fill jobs. And so, I got to believe at some point that's going to start affecting the businesses that we can get here. And I think that that's what gets lost here sometimes is how do you attract people? Well, you give them something to do after work. And that is arts things. It's concerts downtown. It's movies. It's, it's things over at City Auditorium Theater. It's band shell. It's things like that. So that was sort of the first point that I wanted to make is that, people won't move here unless there's a perception that there's something to do here after work. The other reason to fund the arts is all of these businesses, the main thing that they want to attract for employees are creative people. And the way you attract creative people are people that are interested in the arts. That, you're not going to get creative people to move here if after work there isn't creative outlets for them to either go to or to participate in. And then I've got just a couple of statistics here that I think were fascinating. I was looking this over. This is from the video that was done for the Healthy Lifestyle Center, that there's 23,000 people a day that commute into Ames that don't actually live here. And again, I was just amazed when I heard that number that's from the Healthy Life Center video. If we could attract 10% of that to live here instead of commuting to here, think about that what would do for the property values and you'd get more property taxes in and things like that. And you've got to ask yourself, well, why are 23,000 people a day commuting in and out of here? And again, I got to believe it's because if the perception is that there's nothing to do in Ames after work, then you're gonna live in Anki or you're gonna live in Des Moines.
Yeah, well, art certainly adds to the quality of life to a community, and I'm confident the council understands that. It's always going to be, you'll see there's a lot of people asking for money, so what's the right balance? That's what it'll be.
Just ask a question, that is, can you give us some ideas of things that you would suggest council invest in versus just a big bucket of money? What are some things that you would see as being an attractor to people to come to the community and do after work that would, because when it's just a general bucket, it's kind of hard for us to kind of get our arms around it. But I think if you give us some suggestions, that would help council really kind of wrestle with it.
Well, what I'd really like to do, and that was my first question of the night, was, how to do workshops. What I'd really love is for the council to have an arts workshop someday, and we could bring in a number of people who could tell you, details on if you start doing arts, what that brings into the community, not just people, but also money. I mean, it's not like if you spend $1 million, you've just lost $1 million. If you spend $1 million on the arts, the numbers are that you actually make that back.
Well, let me tell you the good news. The city council heard you, and Councilman Garten made a motion and asked the city council to establish a workshop on the arts, and they've done that. Now, the exact date has not been set. I can't tell you it's been next month, but they're committed to do that. I think you wrote.
Instantly answer your question.
I think you wrote did you write the letter to the council? And they listened to you. So there will be a workshop set up. And it's probably the long term. I don't know if it'll help for this year, but it sets the stage for the long term commitment. So I don't know if we'll get it done in the next couple of months, but
it probably will not be. It'll probably be after budget.
This round.
Yeah, we start getting into November, December. We get pretty crowded with activities and things going on. And then we get into budget. So I think it's probably going to be after.
It's probably after, but that's the beauty of the workshop, because you'll have 3 hours to get into an in-depth discussion. I don't want to say 3 hours, but you have a long period of time to get into the discussion with the council on this topic.
And answer your second part of that, which is what are some specific suggestions? I see 3 or 4 different arts organizations here. I think probably each one of them could give you some ideas as to things that they could certainly use money on and spend things on.
Good, thanks.
Dan Culhane, Ames Chamber of Commerce, and also live at 3115 Aspen Road here in Ames. Sir, I didn't catch your name, but I would concur with everything he said. Art is an economic driver, and as an economic development organization here in town, I would completely concur with you that the more outlets we have in our community, the greater it is that some of those people would choose to live here rather than living someplace else. I'll take it a step further in another direction, and I think it's beautification of our corridors. I think our corridors, our major thoroughfares in the Ames community could be far more remarkable than they are. Whether it's plantings, whether it's routine weeding, whether it's burying the utility lines on the Duff corridor, things like that would greatly enhance the overall look of our community. In general, I think Ames looks very good. I have peers that come here for different conventions throughout the course of the year, and they'll say, Ames shows so well. And it does. But I look at the University Boulevard entrance into town that's primarily managed by Iowa State University. And I think if the rest of our corridors looked like that, how great would our community look day in and day out? And so I'd encourage burying the utility lines in our major corridors. I'd encourage more plantings, more weeding, more public art. I'm with you on the public art. We get a lot of compliments as a community on that public art. Chambers from around the Midwest visit us for a couple of days through intercity leadership visits. And there's usually two things they want to talk about. The first one is our public art, and maybe not in that order, but our public art and SciRide. But public art and the public art program we have in our community is really terrific. But I think we can enhance that.
Public art.
And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Good. Well,
Hi, I'm Lindsay Nissen. I live at 3122 Ross Road. Just as a very direct idea for the Ames City Auditorium, we did a musical there last winter called Moon Rock, and we had a great time using the space. We thought it was amazing. And we really like to see that space used more. So my thought is, being of the younger generation, everybody wants photographs, everybody wants pictures, everybody wants to look like they're in a big city. So a beautiful marquee on the front of the building that says what's going on at the Ames City Auditorium, what's happening here. A big Ames on the side that's lit up in neon with the bulbs that go around, and people stand underneath. They get their picture taken in their fancy outfit when they're going to the symphony and going to these events, because that's what people want. They want big city. I'm looking fabulous. That's what they want to see. Like, the corridors and stuff like that. It's beautiful, but there's no photo opportunities. That's what the youth are all about that. So I think, that picture's worth 1,000 words. You put that on your website, City of Ames, look at us. We're big. City, small town, So that's something I would really, really think would help the auditorium and get more people using it and get more people active. I mean, a lot of the people that came to our show, and we almost sold it out, had no idea it even existed. And I think that's a shame, because it's a beautiful theater. So I think that's a very practical thing that could be put into a budget, sponsor something like that. Have a plaque, marquee brought to you by this local person. So, because I'd love to see that happening. And to us as an arts organization over on Reliable Street, anything that happens with any other organization is helpful to us. Anything that brings attention to Ames, attention to our art scene is great for all of us. So,
great. Thank you. Who else likes to?
I'm Heather Johnson with the Octagon Center for the Arts here in Ames, and the address is 310 Topaz Court. Kind of going back to support for the arts in CODA, I wanted to echo a little bit of what you're saying. We are very fortunate to have the support that we do have from Ames, but looking at numbers and comparing what other cities support the arts, I think Ames could do better. Looking at the quality of life numbers, we actually, for the art services under the community enrichment category, only 1.5% goes towards artist services, which I think that could be raised. For the Ames Commission on the Arts, the last couple of years, I think there are now 17 organizations that may take part in operation for that. And because of the increase in organizations, the last year, I think there was only an increase in $171. And so ourselves as an organization, instead of getting a slight increase or staying the same, our support was actually down 2%. So when you take into consideration that difference of 5%, it's a huge hit to what we can do to offer as far as workshops and other enrichment to the community. So I just want to put the numbers out there and say if there's any way that we can increase that part of the community enrichment, I think that we have goals, and I'm talking hopefully multiple art organizations, that we get lots of inquiries about outreach to well-deserved organizations that would love to have art be a part of services, whether it's, helping, mental stability, physical, senior citizens. We get asked so much, but because of funding restrictions, we have to say no so often. So I'd love to see the opportunity where even multiple arts organizations can team together so we can offer some of these services. And also, if there's also a way to, it kind of goes off of the facade program too. We have actually been told that our building, it's 103 years old, that it's in too good of a condition to apply for a facade grant. So I didn't know if that's something too that might be able to be looked at as the qualifications of what that means. But that's something else too that as an organization that might be
Yeah, I've never
great for
heard that before.
Main Street.
When you make an improvement, it has to be done according to some historical standards that were set up. But I've never heard that it's in too good a condition. Well, you probably wouldn't. Well, it depends what you want. You want to change something that is in condition, or
Well,
you
it's
just change
tuck
the-
pointing, like it has to, some other things have to get done to maintain the building itself. And yet we can't get the funding to
Well,
help.
it's just for
make
normal
those-
maintenance, is what you're
Yeah.
saying, rather than a facelift, if you will.
Yeah.
I heard you'd like it changed for maintenance, not just a total facelift. I understand.
Heather, I might just mention that. We'll get to you. I know council really looks at who is being served. So when grants are coming in, really trying to make sure that the broad cross section of individuals, so those may be underrepresented, underserved, who are maybe income challenged as well, and also for the older, the more mature of us in the community. Point being is that I think that even in terms of trying to help council understand what we're trying to accomplish would be very helpful. I can't assure that's going to be necessarily an increase, because part of the challenge we have is that the requests keep going up and the amounts keep going up, and we'd love to basically be able to provide for all those, but our pot of money, our source income is not. And so constantly, we're going to probably need some help from input from people to understand exactly where you prioritize that, because there's certain things we want to provide, and certainly assets part of that as well too, from the standpoint of human services. But good input, and I think we got it down. But just in terms of a pointer, in terms of how you apply, is council really values how we can provide as many services to the community as possible. So I'll come back and get you later.
I'm Sue Ann Peters. My address is 632 Onyx Street, and I'm a volunteer board member at Story Theater Company, which is a children's theater company. We started in 2006 here in Ames, and we're a regular auditorium user, the city auditorium. So we, I guess, have two concerns. And one, Heather had already touched on a little bit about the CODA funding. I think it's exciting that we have more and more arts in the community that are coming to CODA and asking for help or grants or sponsorships and various things. But like she said, we also have concerns about, there's been actually a decrease for those of us in it with more people asking. So I'd like to see that increased and made a higher priority. Also in the auditorium funding, they've actually received decrease in funding at the auditorium, which has made them have to raise rates. So if we look at a 5-year span from 2000. Go ahead.
I'm not sure we reduced funding. Is that what someone told you for
Yeah.
for the auditorium?
just told us, we know we're paying.
That's a different issue. I understand that, but
Yeah,
you're
when
saying
we
the
asked
funding
about
is down.
rates, yes. I'm not sure if that was more of a city council change or more of a Parks and Rec Commission.
I understand your point. It's
Budget
the rates issue.
Yes.
Okay, I understand.
So-
I just don't think the expenditures haven't gone down. The
My-
expenditures keep going up, so I think the rates have been going up to match the expenditures, but you're concerned about the rates, I think, going up, or how much you have to pay for the rates, right?
Yes.
As you rent the facility.
Yes. And my understanding was they had a subsidy amount that was much higher and it was cut significantly. When we asked about,
Okay.
that's what the auditorium has told us regarding the rates.
I think the subsidy's actually gone up, but that's okay. It doesn't,
Okay.
I don't want to detract from the
Okay,
issue of
sorry.
rates are too high.
Okay, yep. So our understanding was that
That's
they
okay.
raised the rates to account for that. And so basically in 2016, 17, we do 2 shows a year at the auditorium, a fall play and a spring musical with our children's theater. And we paid about $8,000 in 16, 17. And it's a gradual rate increase that we're sliding into. So over a 5-year period, we'll now pay $18,000. So 117% increase in rates, which actually makes it unattainable. We can't use the auditorium. And unfortunately, as we've talked amongst the community, other arts groups are having that same struggle and leaving the city auditorium. We think it's a great facility. I think one of the gals back here also commented on that. We think it's a fabulous facility. I'd love to see it used more. And I think the more it is used, it's something we have. It's here in the building. It's something that spurs on more arts to have it be used and be full and so I hate to see it be unattainable to be able to use it. So that's our concerns
Got
for
it.
Story
I
Theater.
understand what you're saying. Thank you.
Thank you. So if you feel like you're getting bombarded by a bunch of art lovers, you are. So there's clearly a reason we're all here. We all are passionate about the arts. We all want it to be funded. We all want to see this town grow and prosper and be a lively place because we want to be here. 3 years ago, my husband and I were going to move. He was up for his 3rd year review at Iowa State, and we couldn't afford studio space for him to do the work that he does. And so we were looking at a place. He was going to apply for a job at Eugene, Oregon, because there's arts, there's culture, there's things happening. We can take our kids out on a weekend and sit outside on a sidewalk and drink wine and see someone tossing something in the air in the street. There's just life, right? And in Ames, we didn't experience that. We would come downtown after dark and the streets are dead. And that wasn't the only time it starts happening in this town is when the bars open up. And I know that because I was a bartender at London Underground. So I speak from a place of experience. So we were planning to leave. And we did the walkthrough at Reliable Street with Lindsay and Elliot when they were first looking at the property. And our minds were blown because there was a physical space that we could explore creative ideas and really go to town on. And so we moved with them and in terms of moving the project forward. And collectively, we've built a space that we've been open now for a month. Hashtag Lockwood Cafe, because I am trying to be hip too.
I heard it's very good, by the way.
That's what the rumors are. I don't know. You have to try it yourself. So we've been open a month, and the resounding feedback that we get from a very diverse audience is that they're so happy that there's a place that's doing stuff that's interesting and weird. The word weird gets used all the time because Ames is not weird enough. So there are things that we can do to make Ames weird that don't cost a lot of money. And one of those things is you're talking about the corridors. Yes, let's have some artists come in and pay local artists to do projects in that space. There's a lot of arts projects that we bring into the city, but we're not paying local people to do it. We're outsourcing it. We've got so much talent in this city that we just need to use. You want to get Iowa State involved? We have had so much luck with Iowa State working with us to do projects, and they're funded. They have money to tap in to do student-led projects. In front of Reliable Street, we have a play sculpture that we could never have afforded they donated it, and it gave the students an opportunity to experience what it was like to, there was the architecture 201 class, right? I'm looking at you. You're an architect. You know this, right? All architects talk. But they built this beautiful play sculpture, and because of it, we are a neighborhood spot that encourages creativity and gets people to connect outside of their normal connections. So yes, you're being bombarded by the arts, but it's because there's a lack of community-centered arts in this town that provide activities outside of 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. And so there's ways to do that without blowing a budget. With Reliable Street, we learned a lot about a budget, and we have done a fairly good job of staying within a reasonable budget to change an old building that was falling apart. There are other old buildings in this town that the city has access to that could do other things to promote arts and culture. So I think the first thing we do is we look at what we have already and how to invest in the people in this community to raise the art level to what the potential is, because we have a lot of artists, a lot of people that want to do art things. So we just need to make Ames weirder.
Well, we're glad you chose to stay, first of all. Good. Good.
Hi, my name's Rachel Junk. My address is 2118 Sunset Drive. So something I'd like to see for the fiscal year in 2020 is funding set aside for completing a greenhouse gas inventory and reduction plan, preferably as a climate action plan. So this is important to complete alongside the greenhouse gas inventory because with the results of that study, we'll be able to see where our community is at in terms of our emissions and how we can begin to lower them and get to net carbon zero. And since lowering our emissions isn't currently being incorporated into the 2040 plan, I think we should have this climate action plan in conjunction with that to fully plan for the future of our city. A lot of other communities have adopted climate action plans successfully. Columbia, Missouri is one example of them, but there are a lot of other phenomenal city programs as well. And we know that climate change will continue to affect our city in the next 20 years, including flooding and other extreme climate events. This plan could incorporate any number of solutions, but I think that setting aside funding for that plan is important.
Gotcha. Yes, ma'am.
Elizabeth Urbis, 2119 Audubon Drive, and I'm here tonight representing Ames Main Street Board and Design Committee. We sent a request earlier regarding the facade grant, and just to update you on that a little bit. When that program was initiated, it was almost 20 years ago, and it was $15,000 for the facade grant, $1,000 for design fees, and $50,000 overall. And we'd like to see that increased at least to inflation rates over the 20 years, which would be about a 50% increase. But we've certainly seen the result of what the facade grant is doing on downtown Ames, and we'd like to see that continue. We put in a request for considering the 15,000 being raised to 25,000.
Increase to 25,000?
Mm-hmm. The design professional fee increased to 2,500 and overall to 85,000.
Oh, per grant, 25, 2,000 architecture and 80,000 total program.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right.
80,000 total program.
85,000.
85.
85,000 total.
Excuse me, it has to be, doesn't it? Okay.
There has been some discussion about facades on the backside of buildings as well, too. Do you have any input on that from the standpoint of, I mean, this is kind of a little bit off the record from the standpoint of the request, but I think it'd be helpful for council if you have, since you talked about it, do you have any input on that?
Yes, we have talked about that. We'd like to see, as you pointed out, someone mentioned the facade grant, maybe changing the rules and regulations. It's interesting that we did our, the building at 131 Main Street is one that Beck Holdings owns, and we did that according to the SHPO requirements for state historic preservation. And they do allow for masonry tuck pointing, and we don't in ours. And I think that's kind of interesting because that's where a lot of the need is. They will allow, it's interesting. I think we'd like to review that, maybe get it up to date to what's being allowed at the federal and state level, and include the facades that face the south from Main Street, the backside of those facades. And possibly there's an increase, maybe doing murals too. So.
I got a flash.
Well, let's
Just lit
make sure
up.
we get it down there.
I'm with the Arts Council.
They want rear.
Okay.
Maintenance, tuck pointing, and, what was the other one? Wait, 1 second. I want to capture, yeah, maybe back, rear facades. Eligibility for maintenance, like tuck pointing. What was the third thing? I can't remember what you said. Is that it? Maintenance, rear yards, rear. That was it, right?
I think it was expanding it to allow maintenance such.
Oh, murals. Yep, gotcha. That was the mayor leading the witness on that one, weren't you? That's good. We hear you.
My name is Catherine Scott, and I live at 1510 Roosevelt. And since the Healthy Life Center bond vote failed, I still think we need to plan for an indoor municipal pool. Eventually, the high school pool will be destroyed, and I don't really want to be without a pool. We need it to exercise. We need it for kids to learn to swim. So I don't know if that takes money. I don't know exactly what that takes.
Takes money.
Eventually, it'll take money.
Everything takes
But
money.
I don't know which budget year. I mean, you'll have to
No, you're
start
right.
working on
Yeah.
a new plan. So.
Have to start over. You have to hire a consultant to start working on concept first, and then move ahead with it.
Actually, the city manager and I were talking this afternoon about that very topic of what's the next step. And the fact is that council recognizes, the pool is going to go away sometime in 2022. And so what's the next step? So I think the conversation will be revived, and it may not be next month, but it's going to be soon. So did you want something or not? No?
You know, my.
I'm Jenny Brockpaller. I'm at 3817 West Lawn Drive in Ames. I'm with the Ames Community Arts Council. So basically, I was letting everyone else talk, and I want to say, yes, please. I got excited when we talked about murals because that is a project we're trying to move forward. And again, that all comes back to that CODA funding because that's what is allowing us to do that. We're using those monies to do some of those projects and some of the wonderful partnerships that we do with the Octagon, with actors, with Story Theater. It all comes down to that funding. I don't have any idea how to spend less, so I'm sorry.
That's the challenge for the city council, isn't it? Anybody else have anything? Wait, just for the TV.
Sorry for you. Okay. I just had a question about the one, the one slide that you showed of the Parks and Rec. Was it showing a decrease in funding over the last 2 years?
50 cents, 46 cents, 41 cents.
Where are you looking? Which one?
It was the one that showed like,
$570.
yeah, the breakdown of the 500.
Yeah, here's that.
Yeah, I'd have to look at it because in that, even in the total cost, that has capital improvements in there
It's just
too.
their proportion, though. It's not, they didn't get less funding dollar-wise. It's just that if someone else got more, like the library renovation project, they would have gotten bond funding, probably relegated to that. So the proportion might have changed with Parks and Rec a little bit.
So that
Or
includes
if a
capital,
bond,
too. You see
Yeah, I
that?
think-
or if a bond project was paid off, like the bonds for Ada Hayden.
Yeah, the
Park,
Hayden
it
bonds
would-
were paid off over that time.
Yeah, so then that
would've-
just makes a difference in what their proportion of the property tax, $100 on a $100,000 home would be, but their dollar amount funding hasn't ever been cut.
Hi, I'm Stan Raby. I live at 219 Wildflower. I just want to reinforce the CODA funding thing. And I think one of the reasons why it's important to the city of Ames is because when I hear about kids getting involved in Story Theater Company or people out at Octagon or any of the singing groups, they're all actively building community within this town. And I moved back to Ames in 2001. And one of the reasons why I moved back to Ames, and I could have moved anywhere, was because Ames has community. And I think anything we can do to reinforce the concept of it's a welcoming place, it's where people network, it's where we build friendships, it's where we have support mechanisms is very important. And the arts do that in this town. And so anything we can do to support the arts and the mechanisms, the community that it builds, I think is good for the city of Ames, and certainly a valid investment for the city of Ames.
Appreciate it. Anybody else? Dan, you get a second? If you forget, you forfeit.
I waited till the end until everybody had at least gone once. Again, Dan Culhane with the Ames Chamber of Commerce. You know, we talk a lot of the things we're talking about tonight are about placemaking. And those things are so important to people moving here rather than taking a job and living someplace else. I think downtown really lacks a real gathering place. And I think one thing I've heard in the past.
What? Excuse me, what?
A gathering place.
Gathering place, excuse me.
You know, a park, some kind of park-like setting. That doesn't mean we don't have a park downtown, but in the past, there's been discussion about a park across the street from City Hall here with a splash pad and some amenities that would bring people downtown and hold them downtown maybe a little longer. Maybe it's an ice skating rink in the winter or in October, whenever you want. I do think that infrastructure is it's always been important, but it's even more important now because people have choices on where they get to live. And if we can give them one more reason to say yes, whether it's a number of things that have already been talked about tonight, or it's a splash pad and a fountain or something like that across from City Hall that brings people downtown, I think that's better for our community. Thank you.
I think my spend more thing might be addressed better in the arts meeting, that sub meeting around some of the ideas, because I too I'm here and advocating the arts from a slightly different perspective. My name's Sam Schill, 2502 Ridgetop Road. I had co-founded an organization late 2011 called Startup Ames. That group was trying to get weird people together. At the time, it was entrepreneurs, it was scientists, it was people in different arts groups. And the idea was we were getting together to try to see what things we could spur on, things we could create. And some people started businesses, some people started other initiatives. And what I had found is I met a lot of unique people that were in Ames that weren't necessarily getting together in other pockets. And what I also learned to appreciate was, as I have been able to grow a couple companies now in Ames, that the arts and having that those amenities and those people and that culture is important to growing a good, being part of growing good business. And we have all these really interesting tech businesses, and I think we'll get more. And I look at my middle school age kids and think they'll probably have a job that's not even invented yet. And I hope that happens in Ames, and I hope that we can continue to spur on there. So so to get to my point though, I've seen through that experience in the last 8 years, a tremendous set of leaders in the arts community that I didn't know existed. I've lived around here a long time, and there's a lot of different entities, a lot of people doing different things. I think some money somehow, somewhere put into, there's enough leadership that would probably give a lot of volunteer hours, a lot of time to do things that might not have the funding to move a big idea forward, but there's enough leadership to combine efforts to make some things happen. That's far from making that happen, but I think the density of leadership, I guess, is what I'm seeing there. So I think of then how's that the council? We need specific ideas, I know, but I do believe the climate for something significant to happen and people to put their shoulder into it is here. And that's kind of an observation, but also just an encouragement to, what a lot of people said.
So are the groups informally talking together to try to pull that together,
I don't
You're
know.
saying the leaderships are everybody talking together?
I've seen talked to a lot of pockets. There is good leadership that have ideas. I do think there needs to be you can throw stuff at me if you want, because I'm just an entrepreneur that isn't an artist, but there needs to be some one-mindedness around what we're trying to collectively accomplish.
Yeah, that's what I'm
a lot
saying.
of good things. I don't know if that exists,
process
but maybe some infusion of cash and would force some one-mindedness about what needs to get accomplished. Because I think, like Lindsay said, there's just a lot of people doing. There's a lot of people that are interested and a lot of people with capability right here in Ames, more than I would have thought 10 years ago. I don't think that would have been the case 10 years ago.
But see, that's an interesting challenge for the council. You could be committed to arts and you'd say, well, we started out with 20 entities. Now we have 2,000 and you could give $2,000 to everybody. but is it making the impact? I mean, maybe we should be becoming the weirdest city in the world, and let's all put the money in that direction, you know? So it's kind of helping council decide, how can we have an impact? We could spread a little bit among 10,000 agencies, or have some vision, grand vision we could build towards. Maybe.
And I think the business community, like Dan has mentioned, is also very supportive
Yeah.
of a grand vision that they can get involved in.
Yeah.
too. So
So to give cash to what that look like and who it should go to. We council have to be very careful, not just start dispersing cash, you know, to private entities, not having a purpose and reason for spending taxpayers' money. So the city is responsible for that. So help us
Which one?
hang some clothes on that.
Centralized vision, maybe. Creative centralized vision for the arts.
Flush that out there for us.
Oh.
yeah, boy, I don't know if I've gone
Appropriate
quite that far
funds
down the track, but
For the percent to creative, that's right. For the arts leaders to create a centralized vision.
yeah, and I will, because I just think there is, I think the leadership exists. And I come at it from a different perspective than some would, but I think that, I don't know how these things are created, whether there's committees of people that, I know there's the arts, and full disclosure, I don't know a ton about what the Arts Council does. I mean, I've been to some meetings, I know a couple individuals that are on it. But this is a much bigger piece, I think, than that. However, a grander initiative and how that people would be on that committee, that thing, I don't know how that exactly gets done. But somehow giving them some sort of ability to put together a larger mission and plan that again has that knowledge to tie it together. I don't know how much money would be needed. Maybe not as much money as we think too. I don't know.
It was just a question regarding the CODA stuff. Is the city allowed to take like private donations for CODA, or does it all have to come out of taxpayer?
No, we can accept private donations, which are tax deductible to
Okay,
use for certain things. Now,
sure. Yeah, I wonder if part of this could be solved. Like, are you allowed to solicit private donations from people? Like, is the
Well,
city allowed
that's
to go
where
out
we don't
and say,
like to do
we're,
for a specific project,
oh, okay.
yeah, let's say there was an art project that we were going to
Sure.
fund and wanted outside donations to it, just like the Healthy Life Center, we solicited funds to help
Sure.
offset taxpayers' money.
Okay.
For a project, we could do that.
Yeah, I was just
And it would be
wondering if
tax
maybe
deductible.
that's something.
If we
that you would-
identify it, if people were behind a certain project.
Yeah, it could like put, money into having a staff person who like goes and, we have bring projects to the city, and then a staff person who, solicits private donations. Because I
Well,
feel like
yeah.
people would be more willing to give it to the city to be
Right.
like, oh,
Let's say you had a
the
mural
city has
program,
a
you know?
project. Yeah.
The city could appropriate X amount, and
Yeah.
the private sector donations could be there when the pot would double to then give it out to certain artists or whatever the program
Yeah.
requirements are. We
Yeah, I
could
was
do
just
that.
curious. I didn't quite know how it worked. Thank you.
So along those same lines, the idea that every arts organization wants part of the pie, right? Like we all need to have funding to make it work. But I guess the point that I was making that got missed maybe with the Make Ames Weirder thing,
Oh,
but that there's ways to spend money on arts without saying it's allocated to arts by including arts in all of the processes. So the marquee, that's a structural improvement. That doesn't have, like, there's got to be creative ways. And here you have a room full of artists who are known to be creative. I think that there needs to be some creative thought going into how to take the money that we're currently spending on city projects and include artists in that process. So you're doing, you're redoing a road, and there's a whole lot of land that's, going to be the city land, and we need to figure out what to do on that. You get an artist who works with soil and science, and they do a whole installation in that. And the cost of that is the same as if you paid someone to plant green grass on that and paid someone to mow it. But instead, you've got a sustainable surface that promotes cost effectiveness, ways to have permaculture as part of the city. It's like there's ways to take creative thoughts and employ artists in this city to make this city interesting and more lively without it all coming from that one small part of the pie. So I'm not advocating for money to be taken away from anybody else. I'm advocating for the arts to be part of the process of how we spend the money. How do we keep it local? How do we work with local artisans to have projects done? Because making art is not a get-rich-quick scheme. That's why we're really creative and how to take a little bit of money and go a long way. So by reaching out to the artist, you can have a more diverse group, help problem solve. So maybe the biggest issue is we don't have artists sitting in on some of the meetings. Maybe the biggest issue is that when you get a bunch of builders together, you need an artist there to be like, yeah, I get what you're saying, but if you did this and insert weird idea, like that's where we need to be disruptors to the system if we're going to really think about how the budget goes further to make Ames interesting with the arts. And the way you are a disruptor is by including a diverse population in the process itself. And what's missing in a lot of the process is artistic minds coming together to really think through how to problem solve the budget with the emphasis of making Ames more weird.
That's the word for the day. I don't know, weird. Peter Rosman, the council, he wanted to make it cool, but that's from a different generation. Now we want it mirror. Yeah, I got you. Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's weird now. I got it.
Kind of going off what has been said about maybe finding new resources for funding for the arts. I don't know if there's something already involved with the city, but just a few weeks ago, there was a fascinating news story about how a city implemented a percentage of each new corporate build or a new township, that a small percent of that would be allocated to public art. And they would hire somebody in that county or in that town to create that piece. So it was still kind of homegrown in a way. And so maybe, I don't know if there could be a committee or a workshop that the city developers or somebody could come up with a plan that would be just a very tiny small amount, but that it would show that the Ames cares more than just 1.5% for community enrichment. I just think a little bit could go a long ways with the amount of resourcefulness that the artist groups in this room and in our town has. So I just want to say, I think this might be a great way to kind of see how maybe new resources can be brought out.
Well, it's really, just to clarify, I think your point is well taken, that you want more money towards it. It's not really a new resource. It's going to come from property tax. It's either local option tax or property taxes. It's a new resource would be something totally different. But I think you want to allocate more money, prioritize the money we do have. You want more money prioritized towards the arts, is what you're really saying. But I'm not sure I would characterize this as a new source of revenue. We only have limited sources. You just want to increase legitimately want to increase in the amounts dedicated to it, right?
Yes.
That's what it is.
Sure.
Unless you had a certain fee, like Dan won't want to hear this, but every time you build, you put in some kind of fee towards the arts. I mean, that's an additional source of revenue. I'm not advocating that, by the way. Don't get me wrong. But so I didn't say that, Dan. I'm just saying. We're not Fort Collins. But that would be an increase. That would be a new source of revenue. But
I think I also heard Steve.
Right.
I think I also heard though is that the concept is that, for example, under our streets budget, maybe part of that street budget would include some art woven into the landscaping or reconstruction of right of way for sake of discussion. And so the point is, instead of trying to look for new money to funnel into the arts, we actually take and rethink a little bit how we develop and provide art woven into some of our projects. I mean, it has to be, maybe we can have a street that just kind of goes really curvy. No, the point is, I think there's ways that we could think about it. It's just trying to think differently. And the term disruptor, I think, is in a positive way, not a negative way. It's basically, it's just changing the way you think, essentially. Yeah.
Trying to think of a small town in Indiana that did this 20 years ago. You all know what I'm talking about. Incorporated art into the infrastructure. And I can't think of the name of the town in Indiana, but they're well known for that. Small town. No. Oh, maybe it is Columbus, isn't it? Yeah, Columbus, Indiana. I think you're right. And they did this 20 years ago. Maybe not the same concepts you're thinking about, but actually people came from all over the country to see that.
And then we talk about the sales tax that we receive from bringing people in. the more
Right.
lively and interesting our community is, the more people are going to spend
Right.
money here.
I agree. But are you aware of the new program that Pat Brown has spearheaded on art down on South Duff? With Dan, are you involved in that too? Where the property owners are going to give rights for the city to have an easement. We're going to put in concrete pads and the pieces of art along the South Duff corridor. You aware of that new program? It's pretty cool. No, it's weird. I shouldn't say cool. It's pretty cool. It's weird. David? It's weird. Can't say cool anymore. It's a new program, the council, and Pat Brown was spearheaded that and encouraged the council to pass that, and the council passed that. And it's an interesting arrangement because we're going to actually acquire easements on private property to put public art on. Oh, everybody know who Pat Brown is? Yeah. Everybody knows Pat. A good point.
Basically talking back to this whole, we've all come up with ways we want to spend it, but obviously we've not come up with any way to spend less there. There's nothing on that side. But I think that this is one of those things that we probably need to look at and say, okay, we've got a little bit of leeway. We're clearly not at the full amount we could be taxing people at. And, I'm certainly not a fan of bigger taxes, but I certainly would not. I would pay a little bit more. And this may be one of those things where we have to say, okay, for the next 3 or 5 years, we need to spend this amount of money on arts, knowing that in the long term, 5, 10, 15, 20-year plan, what that's going to do for us. It's going to attract people here, employers, and people to fill those jobs. So this may be one of those things where we've got to do some deficit spending for the next couple of years for the longer term plan of betterment of the city.
I understand. Actually, won't deficit spend, you have to raise taxes. Exactly. But just appreciate the pressure. I wouldn't want to be a city council person because there's a lot of groups who want to spend on a lot of things and they're all worthwhile. And again, then people say, but you raised my taxes 6% or 7%. Wow, you can't do that. So that's the balance they have to deal with all the time. And they do a good job at it, but
I just say that to weave some of what you're saying with what Sam said, some other said in terms of one is we need to cast a vision, what we're going to do. 2 is maybe using that workshop that we're talking about to try and start cultivating that. I think that would really help council understand, okay, let's just say we had this vision X, whatever it is, and that vision X is going to cost Y number of dollars or Z number of dollars. Then we can start putting money aside for that or investing in that versus just saying, let's just put aside $50,000 or $100,000 a year, but we'll decide later on what we're going to do with it. I think it's much better. And also the community understands, here's what we're doing, why we're putting this money in, and if people don't agree with it, then we have to take that feedback as well too. But I think it might be helpful. So maybe start to get some structure for that workshop. Let's try and get a vision and some ideas, and then you can work on, in the background, thinking about that before they work.
that's what the council does a different and a good job, I think, even for human services, for example, we get a lot more money than Dakota does right now. They don't just give money to agencies, they're buying services. So they're buying services. So the same thing, if you think of Dakota, what's the vision, the arts, what's the vision? And it could be 2 agencies, but they're working towards helping accomplish that vision. That's what they want to buy into. Not just say we're going to give money for operations. They're buying into a vision, a service that leads someplace. And that's a long-term kind of commitment too. That's what I think they get excited about. Pardon me? I want to do a lot of things. I know I want to have a great place to live.
You don't want to spend money, you want to spur growth in the community too. I mean, even in CODA, you want to spur the growth of these arts, not the dwindling out or not
The growth in the arts?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I thought you meant in the city.
But in general and everything.
Well, I wouldn't say that way, but I want to create a quality of life where people want to live here. Now, obviously, if you have a good quality of life, more people want to live here. But I want to make sure we have a good quality of life for people who live here today, not just attract the new people. So it's a balance. Okay, everybody had a chance to speak? All right, this is a tough task for the city council to put this all together. All the fees and charges, property tax. Remember, you lower your fees, property tax goes up. That's okay. Some people are willing to pay for that, right? But that's a balance they're going to have to deal with. And come February 11th, I think it is the last time they're going to make their final decisions. If you weren't here today and you're watching on television, you could still email the council with your ideas on the budget. Okay, still plenty of time. We're at the beginning of this process. For those of you who spoke and had another idea, another concept you want to share with them, plenty of time. Email to the council. Now, I cannot guarantee you every one of your ideas that are up there are going to show up in the budget, but I can guarantee you the council will read all these and take it to heart. Many times these things do show up in the budget. Many times they'll show up in the second year, maybe the third year, because there's a lot of stuff they're being bombarded with. But we will make sure they see it, and I guarantee they're going to take it to heart. It'll be a tough to balance it all, but they do a very good job of that. So I appreciate all your time. You've got the schedule. You could follow us. You can watch it on television. You could stream us. You could come here to city council meetings. Many of these meetings will be open, okay? The documents, when the recommendations come out, these documents, the capital improvements plan around January 20th. Remember, in first week of February is the program budget. They'll be on the website, so you'll be able to see it all too and review it before the council makes any final decisions. So there's plenty of time, even now, to get involved in the budget process. I want to thank you all for coming in.
Steve, before you close, how does everyone know when we're going to do the workshop? How should they find that information out? Because I know there's people who are interested in coming to that. What would you suggest?
Well, all the workshops are on our website, citybeams.org, and on the calendar on the front.
And typically the workshops are usually the third Tuesday of a month. So our normal council meetings are the second and fourth Tuesdays of the month. So workshops usually are scheduled in between that, unless for some reason we have a conflict with council schedule. So if you sometimes can just go on, and as Susan said, we're really trying aggressively to keep all the information on the front page of our website, so you can kind of go and scan that. But I guess, is there a way we can maybe?
I was wondering, do we have the list of all the leaders of the different groups that are funded by CODA? We can send the emails to those people, but maybe we're missing somebody. Is everybody here funded by CODA? You're not yet?
Oh, no. I was just going to say the Ames Community Arts Council has contacts with CODA grantees.
Okay.
Would it be possible if they could just give an email address on that sign-up sheet as well too, and just, and then we know that we could.
We could do that. I'm not sure everybody's represented here though. Is every CODA?
I can help with that.
Okay. We just want to make sure that people, we're trying to be proactive and getting that word out so people know ahead of time.
I can get the email.
What's going on?
Represent, at least represent for every one of your groups, then we'll know to send it out before, in preparation of that workshop. Can you get us first? Okay, great. We'll do that.
I do think that some of the things are talked about in terms of the auditorium rental and the funding for Story Theater, some of those other things, that can be taken into account for this current budget, but the ones that for the longer term, for the workshop. So we may have both an initial for this coming year as well as future years as well.
Yeah, long-term vision. Yeah, you're right. There's some we can deal with immediately. Right. All right, any other questions you might have before we conclude for the day? All right, thank you very much for coming in. Stay involved, watch the budget process. We'll all try to make Ames a better place to live. That's what it's all about, right? Okay. Thank you.